Could you tell what kind of shell casings those were?
Those were 40 caliber.
Are those the type that would be normally fired by a handgun?
Typically, yes.
And those were actually in the street.
Correct.
What's the next thing you discovered, or what did you do next?
I placarded them with little number placards for the photographs 1 and 2. And then as I walked east towards the car lot, I found another shell casing that matched the other two on the parkway, which is between the sidewalk and the street. Typical houses would have grass, but it was a business, so it was concrete there.
So that was another 40 caliber shell casing.
Correct.
That was still not on the lot of the car source.
No. Parkway.
What is the next thing that happened?
I walked into the parking lot and I observed what appeared to be blood on the concrete of the parking lot. Closest to would be the southeast corner of the building.
Can I get that? What exhibit number are we on? 47. These are just see photos. Can I get the first photo should be exhibit 47. Much fair to turn these in. Is it this one? Oh, we're good. Officer, if I could direct your attention to the screen to exhibit 47, what are we looking at here?
So the building I'm talking about is to the left on this picture, and there's a group of 6 cars. That's where most of my evidence I found reference the shooting happened. And that's where the blood was found also, possible blood.
All right, so is it fair to say that if you were standing where the person that took this picture, which was, I presume, you, did you take this picture?
Yes.
Are you facing Sheridan?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Give him a name for the 47, right? So just put on disc.
Yep.
Disc? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So is it fair to say that as you were taking this photo, you're looking directly at Sheridan Road and then what is now Freighter behind Sheridan Road?
Correct, I'm facing east,
That's a more succinct way of putting it.
towards the lake.
And so in the middle of this area of cars is where you found most of the evidence in this scene?
Correct.
Can I have the next exhibit, 48, please? Officer, what is this?
Again, the eastbound picture, just a little bit more close up to the cars.
And exhibit 49? Is this the building?
This is the building I was talking about. It's the very south end of the building where the group of 6 cars were parked.
And the next, I believe, would now be exhibit 50? What is this, sir?
It's a picture of 2 cars, the silver car. I believe there's a number of placards next to it. Those should be, one of them should be where the possible blood is. The other one should be shell casings I found, fired shell casings.
So that moisture on the concrete there, is that related to the crime scene or is that something else?
I couldn't determine what that was.
Now, you talked about placards. There's a pointer there next to, on top of the, no, I'm sorry, an actual wooden pointer.
Mhm.
Could you just go and point out what you mean by placards?
I believe those placards were 4 and 5. Both of those placards were fired shell casings.
And what kind of shell casings were they?
223 Remington Aguilas. Aguila, A-G-U-I-L-A, I believe.
You move to exhibit 51, please. At this point, I'd move exhibit 47, 48, 49, and 50 into evidence, and I would ask for 51 on the screen. Is this one of the placards you were discussing?
Correct.
And that's one of the 223 rounds?
Correct.
How many rounds of 223 ammunition did you find?
That night, I found 2, which is labeled right here in this picture.
Those are the 2 that you found?
Correct.
Are you aware if any others were found of 223 ammunition?
I was told multiple days later that some other ammunition was found.
And do you know where it was found?
I was told under a car, is all I heard.
Did you look under every car for casings?
Yes, I looked under cars.
With a flashlight or something?
Yeah, with the oblique angle with the flashlight, if you put it on a side angle, the shell casings usually pop out at you because they're on a different plane. I didn't see anything under the cars.
And you're doing this around midnight, after midnight on that evening?
Correct.
Yeah, is that some of the blood next to it?
No, the blood's off to the left from the picture.
If I could have the next exhibit, number 52. That's just a close-up of the same placard.
It's a medium shot of the same placard, and eventually I'll do a close-up of it before I pick it up.
Next exhibit 53, please. What are we looking at here?
Right, number 5 is at the bottom of the screen. That's one of the fired shell casings that I was just talking about. And then number 6, which is up on towards the top of the screen, towards the other vehicle that's parked, that was the possible blood that I found.
Would that be all that darker colored area there?
It's hard to see from that picture, but it's definitely where the placard is. I'm not sure about the black color on the right. I don't know what that is.
And is it fair to say that when we're looking at this picture, we're sort of looking in the midst of those group of 6 cars, kind of in the middle of them?
Yeah, I guess, yes.
Okay. So what is the next thing that you did?
I most likely took a medium and close-up of the possible blood on the ground. And then I noticed there's a black hooded, like a full face mask that was to the right or to the north of this picture right here.
So this is just placard 5, that's one of the casings?
Correct. So this one, you can see placard 7, which is that mask that I've located there. It appeared to be fresh, like someone just dropped it there. It had no weathering on it, nothing like it's been there for months or anything like that. Not sure if it had anything to do with the case that we're on, so I just labeled it.
So as we're looking at this, are you facing south?
Yes, I'm facing south. I'm standing at the corner of the building, the southeast corner of the building.
And you're looking right at where the shooting happened?
I'm looking at where my located evidence was found, yes.
So we're kind of looking into the middle of that group of 6 cars?
Correct.
And did you change any of the lighting or do anything with the lighting from earlier in the evening? The lighting that was on that parking lot?
No.
About how long after the shooting were you processing the scene?
I cannot answer. I don't remember. We would have timestamps of that for our dispatch, but I don't remember, to be honest with you.
But it wasn't like 4 in the morning at this point?
No.
So it would have been relatively close to when the incident occurred?
If I had to guesstimate, I'd say an hour.
Okay. I believe this is exhibit 54.
Is there objection?
No.
For now.
Okay. That's it then, right?
54?
Yes.
Okay.
So 51, 52, 53, 54, I'd like to move into evidence. What is then the next thing that you discovered as you processed the scene?
I believe I took a crime scene video of it, and then I collected all the evidence, and then I proceeded back to the police department for the evidence.
Did you find another casing on Sheridan Road?
I believe it was on 63rd Street, west of all the other casings. So the .40 caliber casings I initially talked about on 63rd Street, Those were more towards a house that was labeled 915. I found another one 2 houses away, which is 925 63rd Street, and that turned out to be a 9mm casing, fired casing.
Now, in terms of your activity that evening, is that the extent of your activity at this crime scene?
Before I left, there was a possible shots fired going on in a park west of us, 1 block west of us, and I went over there to attempt to locate evidence also.
Best of your knowledge, that had no relation to this crime scene.
I believe it had nothing to do with this crime scene. There's other shootings going on.
Is everything been moved in?
Yes.
Okay. I have nothing further, thank you.
Cross-examined.
Officer, can you tell me, when you arrived on the scene, did you locate a hospital bag with any items in it?
What kind of bag are you talking about here?
I'm sorry?
What kind of bag? Like a
It's only been
grocery bag
described-
or?
It's only been described as like a clear hospital-type bag.
I did not locate that bag, no.
How about a fire extinguisher?
Not that I can recall.
So in a case like this where it's a homicide, and you're there relatively quickly after the call comes in, I'm assuming, right? Is that
I'm
fair?
not sure how long it took me. I was not one of the first responders. It took me a while to get there from the first responding people.
And I think you had said you do kind of like CSI type of work. That's how you described it.
For layman's terms, yes.
Is the area like taped off that night? Do you remember?
It was.
And so you're looking, and I believe you, I'm not questioning. You're looking under cars for spent casings, and you understand that at a time later, a couple days later, there were more casings that had been located. Is that right?
Correct.
Did you have anything to do with the collection of those? Any involvement in the casings that were found after?
No, I did not.
I don't have anything else. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any redirect?
If you remember, what parameters or what were the perimeter of the crime scene that you were examining?
With the crime scene tape, you mean?
Yeah.
When I arrived on scene, the crime scene tape was put up by other officers who responded prior to me. It was on the very south side of 63rd Street, extended from the alley, which is west of the building in question, all the way to Sheridan Road. It crossed Sheridan Road onto the Kenosha Hospital property, went down the sidewalk northbound towards the other shooting, I guess.
So it was a very large scene.
Yeah, it was taped off. Typically, we'll do that. We'll have the crime scene of the main area of the crime scene, and because of large crowds or unruly crowds, we'll expand it farther than normal.
And is it fair to say that there had been if you know, that there had been a crowd around this crime scene earlier in the evening?
Once the tape was up,
No, before the tape was up.
yes, there's large crowds.
And unless you're told specifically it relates to the crime, is a empty fire extinguisher or a hospital bag something you would typically collect?
Unless I determine it's part of the crime for the investigation, then I would collect it. I had no knowledge of a hospital bag or a fire extinguisher being used in this incident.
Nothing further.
Any question?
If it was there, would you have put that little card on it, the hospital bag?
I would have to determine if it had something to do with this. If it's just blown there from the wind or something like that, then no. If it had no relation to what was actually happening, unless someone would have told me there's a bag involved in this, then I'd be looking for a bag, obviously. We're right across the street from a hospital. It could have been a wind, I don't know. I don't remember seeing a bag.
Okay, thank you.
Nothing on that.
Give me a step down, sir.
Thank you.
Let me come back here. Who's-
Easier to go around that way, actually.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Please be seated.
Officer, I know it's tough because you guys have those big belts on, but if you could just try to maneuver that microphone as close to you as possible and try to speak into it because the acoustics are not great. Can you please state and spell your name for the record?
It's Jeffrey Van Wee, V-A-N, capital W-I-E,
And officer, how are you employed?
the City of Kenosha Police Department
How long have you been a police officer?
for 18 years.
Did you become involved in the investigation of a shooting involving a Kyle-Rittenhouse?
Yes.
And how did you become involved in that case?
I was handed over evidence by Detectives Howard and Antoranium to process and actually secure into evidence.
And how did you go about obtaining that or starting doing that?
So Detectives Howard and Antoranium met me by the police station. From there, the evidence was brought into our evidence room in the police station, and it was turned over to me.
And was this on August 26th?
Yes.
Do you recall the time?
It was roughly 9 in the morning, maybe a little before 9 in the morning.
And do you know from where these items had come?
No.
So what is the very first thing you did?
First thing I did was I was given 2 rifle boxes, so I actually processed the rifles and took photos of them.
Now, do you have any special training to do this type of thing?
Yes, I do.
And what is that?
I'm a certified evidence technician for the last 15 years.
And what does that mean?
That means that as far as crime scenes go, that I would, whenever any different kind of crime scene goes, or I would go respond to that scene and I would process that scene for evidence, searching for whether it's DNA or fingerprint evidence or blood evidence. Also just processing evidence. So like if a detective has an item that he needs processed for DNA, then I would actually take that and swab that correctly.
And how do you swab that correctly?
As far as the rifles went, I actually took 3 swabs from each rifle. The swabs I obtained were from the trigger, from the pistol grip, and then from the barrel has a guard around the barrel, so I swabbed the guard of that barrel because that's the most likely place if somebody's holding that weapon that their hand would be on that guard.
Why would you not, or why didn't you swab the actual barrel?
So when I was given these rifles to process. I was instructed to process them. There was at that time, for my knowledge, there was no reason to swab the barrel.
So you swab the areas where someone is most likely to actually grip or hold the weapon,
Correct.
and that generally would not be the barrel of a gun.
Correct.
So what did you do? What's the first weapon that you encountered?
It was a rifle box that was written. It had writing on it. It said Kyle-Rittenhouse.
So what did you do with that?
With that one, I opened the box up. I wound up taking the serial number down, the information out from the weapon, photographing it, and then swabbing it in those areas I just mentioned for DNA.
Did you take photos of them?
Yes, I did.
And then what is the next thing you did in processing this evidence?
That, once I finish with that, it gets secured up, and then, so I tape up the box, and it's all.
All right, so you weren't here, obviously, but a couple days ago, we had an evidence box and it was opened and it was taken out of there. So you would have at first sealed it up in that box. You were the first one to do that?
That's correct.
And then you would put that into evidence?
Yes,
And then you would come back to the next thing?
correct.
All right, so what's the next thing that you did?
Next was an additional rifle box, which was labeled Dominic on it.
And what did you do with that?
The same process. So I wound up swabbing the same areas on that weapon for DNA, photographing it, and then securing it, taping up and securing it.
Now, I want to go back to the box that had Kyle-Rittenhouse written on it. Did you ever look into you said there was a rifle. Was there anything else along with the rifle?
There was also a sight or a scope, if you will, inside the box. It was not attached to the rifle.
Was there anything attached to the rifle?
A black sling.
And was there any ammunition or a magazine or anything like that?
Not in that box. There was a separate bag that had a magazine in there with live ammunition.
And did that have one or two magazines?
Had one.
And was there any markings on that box or
That-
bag?
I was informed by the detectives that was from the rifle belonging to the Kyle-Rittenhouse.
So what did you find when you looked at that magazine?
The magazine had live ammunition in it.
Do you know how much live ammunition was in that magazine?
The magazine itself was a 30 capacity for 30 rounds, and there were 22 live bullets in there, unfired bullets.
And were they all the same brand or were they different brands?
They were all the same as far as the caliber goes, but there was multiple different brands inside there.
And what was the caliber of these?
There were 223s.
And did you take a DNA swab of that piece of evidence as well?
I did a swab of the actual magazine, so I took a swab off each side of the magazine, a DNA swab.
One swab on both or one
One swab
each?
on each side of the magazine.
And then did you package up the magazine and the
Right,
live
so I
rounds?
wound up taking each unfired projectile out, and then in the order they came in, I secured them in boxes. So like the first unfired bullet that I ejected out of the magazine, I would put in a box and label it 1, the second one 2. So I did that for all 22 rounds, and I
And
took photos of each one.
Took photos of each one?
Correct.
Did you do the same thing with the rifle that was labeled Dominic?
There was no ammunition with that, no magazine.
But you did the same process in terms of the DNA swabbing?
Of the actual rifle, yes.
And then what do you do once you take these swabs?
So the swabs, I wound up securing. The swabs actually go in a little swab box, and I secure them in an envelope, something that can breathe, that's breathable. And then that gets taped up, and I secure those in a locker into evidence.
Was there any other evidence that was not related to these firearms that you packaged or logged that day?
There were a few other items that was handed, yes. There was some clothing, there was a cell phone, and then a backpack which contained some medical supplies.
Did you do anything with the information that you got off of the firearms?
So we do with every firearm that we log into evidence, we have a form called an E-trace form. And what that is we work with, in conjunction with like the ATF as far as having a database and a record of every gun that we log into evidence. So with both of those rifles, I wound up contacting, on the telephone, an ATF agent who actually did a quick, what they call E-trace form with me in order to log that into the database.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Cross-examine.
Good afternoon, officer.
Afternoon.
So, on the 26th, you basically assist these two detectives, Howard and Antaramian, in terms of doing this swab, is that right?
I did this, they handed off the evidence to me,
Okay.
but I did the swabs by myself, yes.
Understood. Well, and your report indicates that at KPD, evidence detective Antaramian advised he needed 2 rifles processed. Did he tell you, he being Detective Antaramian, the areas that he wanted swabbed by you?
He did not.
Who made that decision?
I did.
At that point, do you know anything about the case?
Not a whole lot, no.
Okay, so you mentioned that the trigger is swabbed, right?
Yes.
Okay, and I know we don't have the pistol or the firearms here, so I'm gonna, when you say the barrel guard, is that the area here where my left hand would be if I was holding it like this?
Correct. So the barrel of the gun has a plastic, if you would, guard around it, and that's the part that I swab.
Okay. And then the pistol grip, is that the
Yes.
area?
Right. That's where your hand, your palm would be. So if the trigger's here, the pistol grip is where your hand is holding onto.
Okay. So when the DNA swab is done initially, obviously you're looking for potentially forensic evidence on that gun, right?
Correct.
But you don't know the areas specifically that you're supposed to be looking at. True?
Unless I'm otherwise told, when I process, whether it's a gun or a rifle, it's gonna be typically the same areas that I would obtain swabs from. If there was something else for some other reason or rationale that I would have to do things differently, then I would do things differently. But normally to swab a rifle or a handgun, just about all our evidence people would choose the same areas.
Okay, and I'm
Right.
not questioning that. What I'm asking is, at some point, do you learn more information about this case?
I'm sorry, as far as,
I'll ask it to you this way. Did any detective come to you and ask you to do additional swabs on that firearm now that more information about what had happened was out there?
no, did not.
If somebody would have asked you to swab based on information they had, and they said to you, Officer Van, we would like to know if there's DNA on the actual barrel of that gun, could you have done that?
Absolutely.
And that wasn't done, was it?
No.
The firearm that you, I think you opened it that had it said Kyle-Rittenhouse on it?
Correct.
Okay. There was a sight on that gun, is that right?
There was a sight, it was not mounted on it, it was in the box with it.
Okay. If you remember, and I'm going to use the wrong terminology, so I'm
No, it's fine.
going to ask for your help. That sight didn't have a laser that projected out where, for example, if I was holding it, I could put a dot on your chest, correct?
Not to my knowledge, but I never actually messed with the sight at all, so I never turned it on, I never really viewed it at all, so.
Okay. And this testing was done the day after the shooting, right?
The 26th, so if the shooting was the 25th, then yes.
Okay. Thank you for your time, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Question?
Are you aware if the defense attorneys asked for further testing of the gun?
I was not informed of any other further testing.
Thank you.
Any other question? You may step down, sir.
State Officer Moretti.
Anybody need a very short break? Don't look at me like that.
Let me write you a note.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you are about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please be seated.
Sir, I'm going to ask you to get that microphone right in front of you by any way you can. Perfect. What's your name?
Officer Moretti?
And can you please spell your first and last name for the benefit of the court reporter?
Yes, the first name is P-E-P, and my last name is M-O-R-E-T-T-I.
And how are you employed?
The City of Kenosha Police Department?
And how long have you been with the City of Kenosha Police Department?
A little over 12 years.
And were you working on the night of August 25th, 2020?
I was.
And were you with anyone that evening in your squad car?
Yes, my partner that evening was Officer Krieger.
And what were your general duties that evening?
Patrol.
And what is that? What do you mean by patrol?
We were assigned to an area throughout the city. We were in the kind of downtown area. So we have different areas that we patrol. They're assigned numbers. And we're in what we would consider Area 20, which would be 60th, Sheridan, and other areas around there.
Now, was there anything out of the ordinary going on that night in that area?
Yes, there was civil unrest.
So, was your duty to patrol the civil unrest or other things or both, or how was that working?
It was a combination of both. So we had patrol areas that we were responsible for doing our normal routine patrols, but then we also had to respond to fires that were taking place, civil unrest, and anything that would be actively taking place that would need a response.
At any point that evening, were you made aware of a potential shooting?
Yes, Officer Krieger and I were at 60th Street and 11th Ave, and we heard gunfire, and then a few moments after that, dispatch advised that they were receiving calls that there were shots being fired in the 6300 block of Sheridan Road.
So let me ask this way, you guys were in a squad car,
We were actually, I believe, out on foot at that point at 60th and 11th, and we could hear gunfire in a close proximity to us.
so then what did you do?
We re-entered our patrol vehicle, and then we responded toward the sound of where the gunfire was coming from, which would have been roughly the 6300 block of Sheridan Road.
And who was driving?
I was.
And then Officer Krieger would be in the passenger seat?
That's correct.
So you were at 60th and 11th, did you just drive right down 60th Street?
Correct. We proceeded east on 60th to Sheridan Road, and then I made a right turn to face south on Sheridan Road.
Now, you had lights and sirens on, or how were you operating, if you remember?
I don't recall if I had our lights active at that time.
So what happened when you get to 60th and Sheridan, and you turn right onto Sheridan?
Correct. So I turned the vehicle to face south on Sheridan and observed a large crowd of people. There was a lot of screaming, yelling. There was appeared to be a person laying in the roadway up ahead of us. There was active gunfire throughout the entire city. There was still sounds of gunfire taking place, and we received reports of injured people that needed assistance in approximately the 6300 block of Sheridan Road.
So that would be south of you, and you'd be pointed in that direction.
That's correct.
Now, in this sort of situation where there's potential, this ongoing violence, what are you trained to do? What are you trying to do at that point?
So for a situation like that, the first thing that we would do is if there's an active threat, we're trying to stop the threat. And then after that, it's life-saving measures to try to render aid and preserve life at that point.
So were you going to do that from 60th and Sheridan, or were you trying to get closer?
So we were trying to get closer, but information was put out over the radio that there was rifle gunfire taking place, and we're in a standard patrol vehicle. There's no ballistic protection on our patrol vehicles, and our vests at that point were only rated for handguns. And we weren't equipped to head into what we believed to be an active shooter at that point with the equipment that we had with just the two of us being there. I noticed there were armored vehicles behind us, so I reversed our patrol car and moved it off to the side so that the armored vehicles that were equipped to handle something like that could pass us.
So you were waiting for the Bearcats, as they're sometimes called, to go past you, and then you were going to follow them into the scene.
That's correct.
So what, if anything, happened next?
I'm sorry? Sure.
What, if anything, happened next?
The Bearcats, I believe, began to pass us on the left, so we were in the curb lane, and I believe there was, I'm not sure how many there were, but a few Bearcats, I believe, passed us, and then there was a, at that time, unknown white male approaching us in the roadway toward the front of our patrol vehicle.
And now, as you're sitting here, do you know who that unknown white male was?
Yes,
Who was it?
Kyle-Rittenhouse.
And you had never seen him before?
No.
And when you see this unknown white male, who we now know as Kyle-Rittenhouse, what do you observe?
He had a rifle that was slung and somehow attached to his body. He had his hands somewhat similar to this, and he was approaching us in the roadway toward the front of our patrol vehicle. My partner and I, Officer Krieger, gave him multiple commands to get out of the roadway and step to the side so we could proceed and try to get to where we'd observe people ahead in the roadway that needed assistance.
Now, were you giving these commands, were you shouting out the window? Did you have some sort of system you were giving commands? How are you giving these commands to Mr. Rittenhouse?
I recall Officer Krieger yelling out the passenger window. We had our windows down so that we could hear gunfire that was taking place to try to determine how close it was to us, if anyone were to approach us from behind or the sides. And I believe at one point I used our squad's PA system, which is a loudspeaker that has a microphone.
And what you said, was that directed at Mr. Rittenhouse or the crowd in general?
At Mr. Rittenhouse. We were giving him instructions to get out of the roadway and essentially get out of our way so we could get to where we believe the problem to be.
As Mr. Rittenhouse was approaching the vehicle, were there other people in your way, or was he the primary person blocking you from going down there?
At that point, he was the only one in the way.
So you indicated that Mr. Rittenhouse's hands were kind of up,
That's correct.
and you said he had a rifle.
Yes.
Did you think that that might be the person who could have been involved in the shooting?
At that point, no. In my prior experience in law enforcement, when somebody surrenders to us, they will generally put their hands up, but then they will take a further step and generally drop to their knees, or they will lay in a prone position and make some type of further action. They'll usually follow commands when they're attempting to surrender. I've never in my career had somebody put their hands up and continue to advance and disobey orders from us to not advance on us.
And were there other people out that night that had rifles and firearms?
We were surrounded all night, all week by, there was probably more people armed with weapons than not throughout that entire course of the civil unrest.
So seeing someone with an AR-15 wouldn't necessarily mean much to you at that point?
At that point in time that night, no. I had encountered throughout that entire shift, like I said, I probably spoke to more people that had pistols and rifles and baseball bats and you name it than not. And there were also, I couldn't even tell you how many people came up to me throughout the night that had a rifle and would come up to say, hey, I'm not trying to do anything, I just want to talk to you. And the advice that my partner and I gave everybody that night was, if you're a supporter of us or you're here to try to help, go home. There's a curfew in place for a reason, and being out here is only causing more problems. It's harder to tell who's there to be a problem and who's not.
Now, you mentioned curfew. Did you have the ability to write curfew tickets?
We had a system in place for taking people into custody, and then they'd be issued citations, yes.
And were you doing that to everyone that was breaking curfew, or were there guidelines that you were given?
No, that would have been physically impossible with the amount of people that were out there.
So who, if anyone, were you to give curfew tickets to?
I don't remember exactly what the direction was, but it was something along the lines of just the most severe incidents, or if we were to obviously observe a felony taking place, then we would act on that. But anything that would be more minor, we didn't have the capability or the manpower to address everything that happened in front of us.
So you couldn't give curfew tickets to everyone. What about if you observed, let's say, property damage that did not threaten someone's safety?
That would just have to stay in the stack until we were able to get to it.
So that you had a priority list that evening of things you would respond to.
Correct.
Now, a shooter, where would that be in the priority list?
That would be the top of the list.
So this man we now know as Kyle-Rittenhouse is approaching you. There's commands over the PA. There's commands being shouted. What's the next thing that happens?
He approached the passenger side of our patrol vehicle. With him disobeying the commands and being armed with a rifle like that, I drew my service weapon, and Officer Krieger deployed pepper spray because it became clear and obvious that he was not going to go away, that he continued to just advance on us and disobey commands.
Now, you say you were still driving the vehicle, correct?
Correct.
So when you draw your service weapon, what does that mean? What did you do with it?
So anytime we're confronted with somebody that's armed and that could be a threat to us, it's not uncommon for police officers in this country to be ambushed. And given everything that was taking place, a war zone is the only way I could describe it. We were surrounded, the city was burning and on fire, and we were just outnumbered and completely surrounded. So with his advance with that weapon, we were in a stop position at that point, and we're waiting for him to get out of the front of our vehicle so we could advance. And as he approached the passenger side, I was able to use my right hand to withdraw my weapon and then keep my left hand on the steering wheel.
So did you point the weapon, or you just kind of point it at him, or did you just have it ready? What were you doing with it?
I would imagine that I would have had it pointed at him, because that somebody advancing on us with a rifle, not obeying commands at that point, would be taken as a threat.
Now, were you on patrol the night before?
I believe I was.
You don't remember for sure?
I worked continuously through all of our civil unrest, and I don't believe any of us had any days off, so I would say that's fair to assume.
If you remember, and you may not, is it fair to say there were more fires and property damage the night before than on this Tuesday night?
That's correct. Through that period of things, I was there from the start of the civil unrest with the protesting, and long before we had anything set up or in place. I was there for the start of it and through this incident.
Is it fair to say that there was a more presence of Bearcats and National Guard and things on this Tuesday night than the Monday night previous?
Yes.
Now, you said you drew your weapon and Officer Krieger deployed pepper spray. Were you able to see if the pepper spray had any impact or hit Mr. Rittenhouse?
I'm not sure if it made contact with him, but his deployment of the pepper spray had the desired effect, because he began, I think he continued northbound at that point and got away from us.
So then what's the next thing that happened?
I continued southbound on Sheridan Road, and we located a subject in the roadway, Mr. I'm not sure how you pronounce his last name, Gage
I believe it's Grosskreutz.
Grosskreutz. We encountered him, and his right arm was badly damaged, and he needed urgent medical care.
So what did you observe as you found Mr. Grosskreutz?
There was a large group of people. Everybody was screaming. There was a lot of people running around screaming. The one Bearcat had pulled up and they loaded Mr. Grosskreutz into the Bearcat and requested an escort out of the area to the nearest hospital.
Did you provide that escort?
We did.
And were there still a lot of people around that scene?
Yes, there was people everywhere.
And did you hear any additional gunfire or anything like that?
There was constant gunfire. That was one of the things that when we first encountered Mr. Rittenhouse that didn't set off any alarms for us as far as him being a potential shooter in this incident, was that there was still gunfire erupting around us while we were still out on Sheridan, so we thought there was still an active threat.
So when you found Mr. Grosskreutz, you were concerned there was still an active threat out there.
That's correct.
So after you provided the escort with Mr. Grosskreutz in the armored vehicle, so you go to and where do you go?
We escorted the Bearcat to Frederick South Kenosha Hospital, which was right there. We were actually in front of it. So we got them around to the emergency room entrance, and I went inside to let the medical staff know they had a probable trauma coming in due to the amount of damage that was done to his arm.
And then what's the next thing that you observed or did?
After that, there was a security supervisor for KMH that had called in an officer down, and that triggered a response from us to try to locate an injured officer, which there wasn't. They just couldn't contact one of their security personnel, and they weren't able to find him, so they falsely called that in.
So when you heard injured officer, you thought a law enforcement officer?
Yes, when dispatch advisor was an officer down at the hospital, we assumed it was a law enforcement officer.
Now, we have heard testimony that there was a lockdown at the hospital. Was that part of this?
The hospital, I believe, was either going into lockdown or had already been locked down. We were greeted by, I believe, a security guard at the entrance that gave us access and saw us pull up.
What's the next thing you saw or observed?
There was a male by the name of Giovanni Garcia. He was very panicked. He was in a hospital room, and he kept stating that he wanted to leave.
We don't need, yeah. I wasn't seeking that testimony, so I'm just asking what you saw and what you heard, not what people are telling you.
Okay.
So there was a Mr. Garcia you dealt with,
That's correct.
and then did you have any dealings with Mr. Rosenbaum?
I did.
And what were your dealings with him?
A Dr. Bornis had advised me that Mr. Rosenbaum was deceased from his injuries, and he was moved to room 18, I believe it was, in the ER. I photographed his body and then collected the clothing that he was wearing that night.
Do you have any training in evidence handling or anything of that nature?
I have standard training for evidence handling. I'm not an evidence technician, but I do have standard training for handling of evidence.
So collecting evidence generally is one of your duties as a patrol officer?
That's correct.
Did you stay with Mr. Rosenbaum's body at any point, or what did you do?
I did.
You did?
I did.
Until when?
I don't recall what the duration was, but I did secure him into a body bag. And then I spoke with a medical examiner about him being deceased, and I was advised to place him in the morgue at the hospital there because they were overrun with tasks and other things and didn't have somebody to send there. So I was able to place his body into the morgue there for safekeeping.
So what did you do with all the clothing and belongings from Mr. Rosenbaum?
I bagged them as I was trained to bag them individually, and then I later secured those into an evidence locker in the the public safety building.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Cross-examine? Yep.
I just want to go back to something you said. You said your body armor at the time could not withstand rifle shots?
That's correct.
And do you know why that is?
It's not rated for rifle rounds. Our body armor that we wear has a rating that comes along with it, and there's an explanation with that rating of the type of rounds that it's capable of stopping. And a rifle round is well above what our body armor was capable of stopping.
If you know, is that because it's rifle rounds are full metal jacket rounds, or do you know why it would be that way?
I'm not sure what exactly the classification was of the ones that we have, but there is a set that they have for the type of round, the caliber, and the amount of force that comes with that round, and the ability of the vest to stop those rounds.
So a rifle round could have penetrated your vest and actually done serious damage to you?
It would have gone straight through it like I was wearing nothing and caused severe damage to me or my partner, yes.
Thank you.
So Officer Moretti, you had, on direct, described that scene as a war zone, is that right?
Correct.
And it was like that, tell me if this is right, on the 23rd, evening of the 23rd, 24th, and into the 25th?
Yes, there was escalating damage and violence that was taking place over the nights.
And in all of your time as an officer, have you ever been involved in nights like that?
Nothing to this magnitude, no.
And I think you said more people were armed than not armed?
Correct.
Can I ask you this? So you were working on the 24th and the 25th?
Yes.
You had said there was more damage, more fires on the 24th and the 25th. Is that right?
That would be my feeling, yes.
Were there more people protecting buildings that you saw on the 25th than on the 24th?
I did observe more people that were armed out in places. I don't know exactly what their alleged function or intended role would be. I didn't have many conversations with people that were out there. We did notice some heightened security.
Okay, so my question was, more people that were protecting the businesses, the less fires that you saw. True?
I don't know that I would equate those two, no. The city was,
Well, there was more fires on the 24th than the 25th. That's what you said, right?
I don't have a report written that would indicate the amount of fires that were started, and I would just be going back and using memory to try to remember. I'm not certain the totality of the fires or how many fires were started and what nights they were.
Okay. So your report indicates that, so you hear gunshots coming from the south, is that right? At about 11:49-ish on the 25th?
I believe so, yes.
And are you able to, through your training and experience, decipher the type of firearm that has been fired, like a pistol, a shotgun, a rifle? Can you do that?
On occasion, sometimes it's harder to decipher different calibers, but sometimes you can.
Were you able to decipher what you thought you heard on the 25th at about that time, at about 10 minutes to midnight?
At the time, I'm not sure what thought process I had at that point. There was just gunfire erupting, and there was multiple types of gunfire going off simultaneously. So I would say it'd be fair to say that, yes, some of it sounded like rifle fire and some of it like pistol fire.
Can you bring it up? What's the number? Exhibit 5. Officer, Marty, I'm going to show you Exhibit 5. If you can tell me, is this vehicle right here the vehicle that you're in?
From this picture, yes, it appears to be.
Okay. And you're in the driver's seat of that vehicle?
That's correct.
Okay. Do you see at that point, you know that's Mr. Rittenhouse now, right?
Correct, now, yes.
Do you see him coming toward you at that point?
From our vehicle?
Yeah.
Yes.
And I know you had said you were outside your vehicle. Is the fair to say at that point you're back in your vehicle?
At this point, yes, because we had just turned the corner.
Okay. All right. And now he has his hands above his shoulders, kind of walking toward you. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Go ahead, please.
Stop them! Hey, dude right here just shot them! Dude right here just shot.
Can you hear those people yelling that guy just shot someone?
At this point in time, no. No, we cannot.
All of them down there! That dude just shot someone right there! That dude right here! Yeah.
And are you backing up to let the Bearcat through, or are you backing? Is that the reason you're backing up?
At this point, with watching this video, it'd probably be dual purpose here. So I did want the Bearcats to be able to get around us. And as you saw twice there, Mr. Rittenhouse did manipulate his rifle as he's walking toward us, like in this part right here. His hands are not above his head. They're actually down toward the rifle. So that's where my partner and I were going through the process of wondering what this is.
Okay, very good.
Someone injured straight ahead.
Now at that point, is that you yelling, "Get out of the road"? Did you hear that?
Yes, I heard it. I'm not certain if that's Officer Krieger or myself. I believe both of us were yelling at him to get out of the road.
Okay. And you had, I think you had said to Attorney Krause that normally in your experience, people who are surrendering, they'll put their hands up, but they'll do other things, correct?
Correct. They'll usually get down on their knees or prone themselves out and follow instructions that we're giving them.
Right. You're not giving him any instructions to get on his knees or lay down.
That's correct.
Okay, so when you say people do things like do this and then lay on the ground, that's done at your direction most of the time.
Not necessarily. I've had quite a few experiences where when somebody does have a desire to surrender to us, they will do that on their own because they're aware that they're armed and their intent is to surrender and they don't want something else to happen. So.
And it's also when police officers are dictating to them what to do, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Get down, hands behind your back, or whatever it is. That you
Correct.
want.
Yeah, instructions would be given at that point as well.
Fair enough. So, at this point, it's your, and I'm not being critical of you, it's your testimony that at this point, you have no idea that he's done Mr. Rittenhouse has done anything wrong.
That's correct.
Do you ever make contact with him about him having a firearm in public?
No.
Do you ever want to get any information that he might have as to why he's walking toward you with his arms up like this?
Yes, that would be something that we would do secondary. As I had stated earlier, when you still have gunfire that's actively taking place, there's victims that need assistance and there's still potentially a threat that's got to be stopped. So those take priority over collecting names and information at that point.
Now, to be fair, in hindsight, the person who was involved in this was, for lack of a better term, you didn't know it at the time, but he was surrendering to you. Right?
That's quite possible, yes.
And can you just finish playing the tape? You saw him do that, right? He
Correct.
backed up from the car. Is that the point that you believed Officer Krieger had used the pepper spray?
Yes.
And at that point, you and or Officer Krieger told him to go home or something like that?
I don't recall anybody telling him to go home. The only commands I recall giving him were get out of the road and to stay back.
When you went to the hospital, did you see any videos of what had happened? Meaning any of the shootings?
I know that there were people that had videos playing on cell phones through, I'm not sure if it would be social media or what the websites would have been, but there were people that had videos of what was taking place on their phones, yes.
When you were at the hospital, did you become aware that the person that you had contact with right there was the shooter?
I was focused on preserving evidence with Mr. Rosenbaum and other tasks that I had to take place, so that was all in passing. I didn't focus much on what was taking place with that video.
Is there anything else you want? Officer Ready, I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any
Officer, what is your sole focus as you're sitting in that squad car addressing the potential active shooter?
That if we were to come across a threat, to stop that threat, and if we weren't actively engaged with somebody that was a threat, to preserve life and find anybody that was injured and needed medical assistance.
Now, in that video that was just shown, it showed that Officer Krieger was outside the squad car. Do you know how he was outside the squad car right before you backed up?
I don't remember him leaving our vehicle.
Can we play that exhibit again?
Hey, he just shot them. Hey, dude right here just shot them. Dude right here just shot all of them down there. That dude just shot them right there. That dude right here. Yeah.
Officer Krieger to get out of or he was behind the vehicle, kind of by the trunk area, and then jump in the passenger seat?
Yes, it appeared that he was exiting to retrieve something from our trunk.
Okay.
Attempting to retrieve something from the trunk, it appeared.
What kind of things do you have in the trunk?
That night we had medical supplies. I believe he had a type of ballistic vest that had plates in it that would have been more helpful for rifle rounds. And I don't recall if he had a rifle in the trunk that evening or not.
So it'd be more helpful with rifle rounds, but perhaps not stop them?
Correct.
And you're talking about rifle rounds, you're talking about 223s fired from an AR-15 like the defendant had?
Correct.
You have nothing further?
Let me step down. Is it for the day? Who wants to have a little early break today? Let's break for the day. Obviously, the standard rule, please don't discuss the case with anyone, not even with members of your household. Don't read, watch, or listen to anything to do with the trial, any account or anything else. Keep in mind what I told you the first day. You're welcome to tell people, people may know, who know you, know that you have been coming to the courthouse every day. So they may be aware, and you're welcome to tell people, you're on a jury. I'd rather you didn't if you can avoid it. But tell them you're on a jury, but just say the judge was very forceful in saying that I can't say anything about it at all, hear anything about it at all, or we'll both be in really big trouble. Perfect advice. With that, have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you Monday at 9 a.m. And would you please go to the jury? You want to, in the library or the jury room? Library? Jury room? Please go to the jury room and speak with Mrs. Mataska Menting. Thank you. I have a note here, it says exhibits 47 to 54, which you presented on disc. I will need hard copies of those photos before Kraus leaves today or else. That's from the clerk of the court. And the clerk must be obeyed.
Okay.
Hard copies before you leave today. Thank you. And it's on TV. It's on record on TV.
So,
What did I tell the jury? You'll be in really big